November 30th, 1864. A man stands on a hill overlooking an open field. Nearly 2 miles of empty ground stretch before him. No cover, no trees, just grass and mud. At the far end, 27,000 Union soldiers wait behind fortified trenches. General Patrick Cleburne turns to his officers. He's 36 years old, Irish immigrant, the best divisional commander in the Confederate Army. He says 6 words. "Well, gentlemen, we will die today. In the next 5 hours, 6 Confederate generals will be killed, more than any other battle in the entire Civil War. 55 regimental commanders will become casualties. 7,000 men will fall, and the Army of Tennessee will be destroyed forever." This is the story of the Battle of Franklin, the most tragic assault of the American Civil War, a frontal attack so suicidal that Confederate officers begged their commander not to order it, so devastating that some units suffered 90% casualties. For the next 30 minutes, you'll discover what really happened on that blood-soaked field, why a Confederate general ordered his men to charge across 2 miles of open ground into entrenched positions, why soldiers who knew they were going to die charged anyway, and why one man died just 100 yards from his childhood home. This is Franklin, where heroism met madness, and an entire army died in a single afternoon. November 30th, 1864, 3:45 in the afternoon. The temperature is dropping. Dark clouds roll across the Tennessee sky. In a few hours, it will be freezing, but John Bell Hood doesn't care about the weather. The Confederate commander stands on Winstead Hill, 2 miles south of Franklin, Tennessee. Below him, 20,000 men form assault columns. His entire army, his officers surround him. They're arguing. General Benjamin Cheatham speaks first. "General Hood, this is madness. We can't assault those positions." Hood ignores him. General Patrick Cleburne tries next, the calm, analytical Irishman who never loses his composure. "Sir, we should wait for our artillery. Flank them. Anything but a frontal assault." Hood's face hardens. "We attack now. Sunset is at 4:30. There's no time for anything else." General Frank Cheatham, normally quiet, can't stay silent. "General, those are the same entrenchments that stopped us at Atlanta. They've had all day to improve them. This will be a slaughter." Hood explodes. "They're right there. If we wait, they'll escape again, like they did at Spring Hill. I'd rather fight them here than behind Nashville's defenses." The generals exchange glances. They all know the truth. Last night at Spring Hill, Schofield's entire Union army marched through Confederate lines while Hood's commanders slept. A coordination failure, a humiliation. Hood blamed everyone but himself. Now he wants blood. General Cleburne looks across the field one more time. He can see everything clearly. The Carter House, the Cotton Gin, the Pike Road, the Union fortifications, and he can see what's about to happen. He turns to Captain Irvin Buck, his staff officer. "Buck, this will be short but desperate. I have a feeling I won't survive. If I fall, tell them." He pauses. "Tell them I did my duty." Buck tries to protest, but Cleburne walks away. Across the field, Union General Jacob Cox watches the Confederate preparations through his binoculars. He sees the assault columns forming, sees the regimental flags, counts the divisions. He turns to his staff. "They're really going to do it." An aide asks, "Do what, sir?" "Charge across 2 miles of open ground against entrenched positions, in daylight." The aide is silent for a moment. "That's suicide." Cox nods slowly. Yes, it is." Behind Cox, 27,000 Union soldiers wait in trenches. They've been digging all day. The works aren't perfect, but they're strong. Parapets, headlogs, firing steps, interlocking fields of fire. And they have artillery, lots of artillery. At the Carter House, Captain Theodric Carter stands with his company. Everyone calls him Todd. He's 24 years old, and he's looking at his childhood home. The Carter family house sits less than 100 yards behind Confederate lines. His father, his sisters, they're hiding in the basement right now, trapped between two armies. Todd left Tennessee 3 years ago to join the Confederacy. He's fought in dozens of battles, survived the hell of Chickamauga, the disaster at Missionary Ridge, the Atlanta campaign. And now he's home. His closest friend, Lieutenant John Overton, notices Todd staring at the house. "We'll liberate it in an hour. You'll see your family." Todd doesn't answer. He just stares. Back on Winstead Hill, Hood gives the final order. "Advance!" At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 20,000 Confederate soldiers begin marching forward. The ground trembles. This is it. What happens next will be remembered as the bloodiest 5 hours of the Civil War. A tragedy so complete that it will break an entire army. A disaster so absolute that historians will debate for 160 years how anyone could have ordered it. But right now, in this moment, 20,000 men march forward, because orders are orders, because their commanders told them to, because in 1864, soldiers still believed in honor and duty and sacrifice, even when it meant certain death. The attack begins. Before we continue with this story, a quick request. If you're enjoying this so far and want more people to know about this incredible but tragic piece of history, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to keep bringing stories like this. And if you want more deep dive history content that goes beyond the surface level, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. I make videos like this every week. All right, let's go back to Franklin, Tennessee. November 30th, 1864. To understand why this battle happened and why it became such a catastrophe, you need to understand the man who ordered it, John Bell Hood. He was 33 years old, youngest army commander in the Confederacy. He'd lost the use of his left arm at Gettysburg, lost his right leg at Chickamauga. He rode strapped to his saddle, kept upright by morphine and sheer willpower. He was also completely unqualified to command an army. Hood was a brilliant brigade commander, aggressive, fearless. His Texas brigade was legendary, but commanding 40,000 men across multiple states required strategic thinking Hood didn't possess. Jefferson Davis gave him the Army of Tennessee anyway. Why? Because Hood promised to do what Joseph Johnston wouldn't, attack Sherman aggressively. It was a disaster. Hood attacked Sherman's army 4 times in 8 days around Atlanta, lost every single battle, abandoned the city, then, in a fit of strategic genius, decided to invade Tennessee while Sherman marched to the sea unopposed. His subordinates thought he was insane. They were right. By November 30th, Hood had been chasing General John Schofield for 2 weeks. The night before at Spring Hill, he'd had Schofield trapped, perfectly positioned to destroy him. Then his subordinates failed to execute. Schofield escaped. Hood was furious. And when angry men with armies make decisions, soldiers die. To understand Franklin, you need to go back 3 weeks, to November 16th, when Hood finally crossed the Tennessee River and began his invasion. He'd spent all of October waiting for supplies that never came, waiting for Nathan Bedford Forrest's cavalry, waiting while the weather got worse and his window of opportunity closed. The Confederacy's infrastructure had collapsed, rails were worn out, roads were mud, depots were empty. Every day of delay made success less likely. When Hood finally moved, Union General George Thomas was already fortifying Nashville. John Schofield was consolidating his forces at Columbia, Tennessee, blocking the direct route north. Hood's only advantage was speed. If he could get around Schofield, cut him off from Nashville, he could destroy one Union army before facing the other. It almost worked. Hood sent his entire army on a flanking march around Columbia. For 2 days, Schofield didn't know where the Confederates were. Nathan Forrest's cavalry screened the movement perfectly. By November 29th, Hood's army was at Spring Hill, Tennessee, directly between Schofield and Nashville. The Union Army was still south of Spring Hill, trapped. All Hood had to do was hold the crossroads. He failed. What happened at Spring Hill is still debated to this day. It was one of the greatest missed opportunities of the entire war. Hood's plan was actually brilliant. His cavalry screened the flanking movement perfectly. Schofield had no idea where the Confederate army was. By the evening of November 29th, Hood's entire force was positioned directly on Schofield's supply line. The I turnpike from Columbia to Nashville ran right through Spring Hill. If Hood blocked it, Schofield would be trapped between Hood's army and the Duck River. He'd have to surrender or be destroyed. All Hood needed to do was occupy the crossroads. But the execution was a disaster. Hood sent General Benjamin Cheatham to take the crossroads. Cheatham's corps was the closest. Simple order: seize Spring Hill and hold it. Cheatham moved forward, but encountered Union cavalry. Instead of pushing through, he waited for orders. Hood, thinking Cheatham would handle it, didn't send reinforcements immediately. By the time Confederate infantry reached Spring Hill, Union infantry had arrived too. A brief skirmish erupted. The Confederates pushed the Union troops back, but didn't pursue aggressively. Then Hood sent contradictory orders. Move here. No, move there. Attack this position. No, wait for support. His division commanders were confused. They'd been marching for 2 days with minimal sleep. They didn't know what Hood wanted. By sunset, the Confederate divisions were scattered around Spring Hill, but not blocking the turnpike. There was a gap in the line, a crucial gap. And that night, Schofield's scouts found it. At approximately 10 o'clock in the evening, the first Union wagons began rolling north on the turnpike. Then infantry, then more wagons, then artillery, 27,000 Union soldiers, their entire supply train, hundreds of wagons, dozens of artillery pieces, all marching. Right past Hood's army in the darkness. Confederate pickets saw them, heard the wagons, could literally see campfires and lanterns moving on the road. They tried to raise the alarm, fired warning shots, ran to find their officers. But most of the Confederate officers were asleep. Exhausted from the march, they'd bedded down for the night. When pickets woke them, they didn't believe the reports. "That's impossible," one colonel said. "Schofield is trapped south of here. Those must be our own wagons." So the pickets were ordered to stand down, stop shooting, stop making noise. And Schofield's army kept marching all night long, thousands of men, within earshot of Confederate camps. Some Union soldiers later said they could hear Confederate soldiers snoring as they passed by. When Hood woke up on November 30th and discovered Schofield was gone, he couldn't believe it. He rode to the turnpike himself, saw the tracks, the evidence. Then he exploded. He blamed Cheatham, accused him of cowardice, of incompetence, of deliberately disobeying orders. He blamed Cleburne for not attacking when he should have. He blamed everyone except the person actually responsible, himself. Hood had issued confused orders. He'd failed to personally verify the turnpike was blocked. He'd gone to sleep without ensuring his most important objective was achieved. But admitting that would mean admitting he'd failed, and John Bell Hood never admitted failure. When Hood woke up on November 30th and discovered Schofield was gone, he was apoplectic. He blamed General Benjamin Cheatham. He blamed General Patrick Cleburne. He blamed everyone except himself. And he decided that someone would pay for this humiliation in blood. By midday, Hood's army reached the outskirts of Franklin, and there was Schofield fortifying the town. The smart move was to wait, bring up artillery, probe for weaknesses, flank the position. Hood didn't care about smart moves anymore. He cared about punishing his subordinates, proving his courage, washing away the humiliation of Spring Hill with a glorious victory. He ordered a frontal assault. His generals tried to stop him. Every single division commander argued against it. They'd all fought at Kennesaw Mountain, where a frontal assault against entrenchments cost them 3,000 casualties in 20 minutes. This would be worse. The field at Franklin was longer, the defenses were stronger, and there was no artillery support. Hood's artillery was still miles behind, stuck in the mud on Tennessee's terrible roads. He had exactly 2 batteries, 12 guns to support 20,000 men assaulting fortified positions. It was insane, but Hood wouldn't listen. He'd made his decision. And in the Confederate Army, you obeyed orders, even suicidal ones, so the officers stopped arguing. They went back to their commands, and they prepared to die. Patrick Cleburne knew exactly what was coming. He'd been a soldier for 15 years, first in the British Army, then in the Confederacy. He understood tactics, he understood terrain, he understood that what Hood was ordering was murder. But Cleburne also understood duty. He gathered his division. Most of them were veterans. They'd followed him through every battle since Shiloh. They trusted him completely. He couldn't tell them they were marching to their deaths, so he told them something else. Men, you've never failed me. Today, I need you to do your duty one more time. Stay in line. Keep moving forward no matter what, and we'll take those works. They believed him. Across the field, the Union soldiers watched the Confederate preparations. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. They're not really going to attack, are they? One soldier asked his sergeant. The sergeant, a veteran of Antietam and Gettysburg, nodded grimly. Yeah, they are. Across all that open ground. Yep, that's crazy. The sergeant checked his rifle, made sure his cartridge box was full. Welcome to the war, kid. At the Carter house, Todd Carter wrote a quick letter. He didn't have time for anything long, just a few lines. Father, I am home. I can see our house from here. If I fall today, know that I died doing my duty. Your loving son, Todd. He folded it, put it in his jacket pocket and picked up his rifle. At 4 o'clock the order came. Forward. 20,000 men began to march. The first 15 minutes were almost peaceful. The Confederate line advanced in perfect order. Battle flags flying, officers on horseback, regimental bands playing. It looked like a parade. The Union artillery held their fire, too far away. They waited. The Confederates crossed the first half-mile without a shot being fired. Some of the younger soldiers started to relax. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Maybe the Yankees would run. The veterans knew better. At 1 mile out, the Union artillery opened fire. Solid shot first, cannonballs bouncing through the ranks, taking off heads, smashing limbs. Gaps appeared in the line. Men closed them and kept marching. Then shells, explosive rounds that detonated above the formations, sending shrapnel slicing through packed ranks. More gaps, more men closing them. The Confederates couldn't return fire. They had 12 guns. The Union had dozens, so they just absorbed the punishment and kept moving. 3/4 of a mile out, the rifle fire began. 27,000 Union soldiers, all with rifles, all behind cover, opened fire at once. The sound was indescribable, like thunder that never stopped. The front ranks of the Confederate line disappeared, just gone. The second rank climbed over their bodies and kept advancing. This is when most attacks break. When soldiers realize that going forward means certain death, they stop. They take cover. They retreat, but not at Franklin. The Army of Tennessee kept moving forward. Why? Pride, duty, fear of showing cowardice in front of their comrades, belief that if they just kept going, they'd reach the works and it would be over. But mostly, they kept going because their officers were still leading. Patrick Cleburne rode at the front of his division. His horse shot out from under him twice. Each time, he got up and kept walking forward, sword raised. General States Right's Gist, commanding the other assault division, rode forward despite being wounded. General John C. Carter, Todd's distant relative, led his men personally. If the generals were going, the soldiers would follow. But it was becoming impossible. The Confederate line was dissolving under fire. What started as neat ranks became a rushing crowd of men desperate to reach cover. Any cover, even if that cover was Union trenches filled with enemy soldiers. At 100 yards from the Union line, the attack hit the abatis, sharpened logs driven into the ground, pointing outward, meant to slow attackers. It worked. Men tried to climb over them, got stuck, were shot while tangled in the obstacles. Others tried to go around, bunching up, making perfect targets. The Union fire intensified. Impossible as it seemed, it got worse, and men kept dying. General States Rights Gist was killed here, shot through the chest while trying to rally his men through the obstacles. General John C. Carter fell here, mortally wounded, but some men made it through. And at approximately 4:45 in the afternoon, the Confederate attack hit the Union line. This is where things got truly horrific. The first Confederates to reach the trenches were immediately shot or bayoneted, but more kept coming, and more. And more. Within minutes, hand-to-hand fighting erupted all along the line, men fighting with bayonets, rifle butts, knives, fists, no room to reload, no time to aim, just desperate, brutal, close-quarters combat. The noise was indescribable, not just gunfire, but screaming, men cursing, officers shouting orders nobody could hear, the wet thud of rifle butts hitting skulls, the sound of steel scraping against bone. The Union line bent. At the Carter House, one Confederate brigade, led by General George Wagner's division, actually broke through. They climbed over the parapets, pushed the defenders back, and seized a section of the works. The fighting here was absolutely savage. Men too close to use rifles as rifles, they reversed them and used them as clubs. When rifle stocks broke, they used the barrel. When that broke, they used their bare hands. One Union soldier later described picking up a rock and smashing it into a Confederate soldier's face. Then another soldier attacked him, then another. He said he lost track of how many men he fought. Just survival, primal, desperate. For a few minutes, it looked like the attack might succeed. If the Confederates could widen the breach, they could roll up the entire line. Then Union reserves counterattacked. The 12th Kentucky and 16th Kentucky charged forward. These weren't green troops, they were veterans, and they were angry. The counterattack hit the Confederate salient like a hammer. More hand-to-hand fighting, even more brutal than before, men stabbing each other with bayonets, wrestling in the mud trying to strangle each other, beating opponents with rocks when their weapons broke. A Confederate captain later wrote, "I saw things at Franklin I will never speak of, things no man should do to another, but we did them. God forgive us, we did them." The fighting in the salient lasted 20 minutes. It felt like hours. Eventually, the Confederates in the breach were overwhelmed. Most were killed where they stood. Those who tried to surrender were often shot anyway. Too much blood, too much adrenaline, too much rage. The Union line held, but barely, and the cost was staggering. That one small section of the line, maybe 100 yards wide, had over 1,000 casualties. Bodies were literally piled on top of each other. One Union officer tried to count the dead in the salient after the battle. He gave up at 300, just too many. But the Confederate attack didn't stop. For the next 4 hours, as darkness fell and the temperature dropped, Confederate soldiers kept throwing themselves at the Union works. Wave after wave, attack after attack. Some were organized assaults by intact units. Others were just groups of men, leaderless, too committed to retreat, charging forward into the fire. All of them died. Patrick Cleburne was killed around 5 o'clock. He made it to within 20 yards of the Union line before a bullet struck him in the chest. His body was found the next morning, face down in the mud, sword still in his hand. General John Adams rode his horse directly into the Union trenches. Why? Nobody knows. Maybe he was trying to inspire his men. Maybe he'd just had enough. His horse was shot dozens of times. He fell into the trench, landing on Union soldiers. They bayoneted him and his horse where they lay. General Otho Strahl was killed leading a charge. General Hiram Granbury was killed in the same attack. 6 generals dead, the most killed in any single battle of the entire war. 55 regimental commanders became casualties. Entire regiments lost their command structure. The 1st Tennessee Infantry went into the battle with 400 men. By dark, 35 answered roll call. The 1st Missouri had 300 men, 12 survived unwounded, 90% casualties, and still the attacks continued. Union soldiers ran out of ammunition. They pulled cartridges from dead men's cartridge boxes. When those ran out, they threw rocks. Confederate soldiers climbed over walls of their own dead to reach the Union line. Some works had bodies piled 4 feet high. At the Carter House, the fighting was so close that the wooden walls of the house were shot to pieces, over 1,000 bullet holes. Artillery shells lodged in the walls. The family huddled in the basement could hear men dying just feet above them. Todd Carter fell somewhere around 6 o'clock, shot in the head within sight of his family home. His friends dragged him back, still alive but unconscious. The attacks finally stopped around 9 o'clock, not because anyone ordered them to stop, but because there was nobody left to attack. The Confederate army had been destroyed. That night, as the temperature plunged below freezing, the sounds from the battlefield were unbearable. Thousands of wounded men crying for help, for water, for their mothers, begging someone to end their suffering. Both armies could hear them. Neither could help. The fighting had been so vicious that both sides shot at anyone moving in the darkness, afraid of a surprise attack. So the wounded just lay there in the cold and died. By morning, 7,000 men were casualties, most of them Confederate. The battlefield was covered in bodies, literally covered. You couldn't walk 10 feet without stepping on a corpse. A Union soldier wrote in his diary, "I have seen terrible things in this war, but nothing like Franklin. Hell itself could not be worse." John Bell Hood, watching from Winstead Hill, finally accepted reality. His army was finished. That night, he wrote to Richmond. He blamed his subordinates, blamed the terrain, blamed everything except his own decision to order a suicidal frontal assault. But he couldn't change what happened. John Schofield, his baggage train across the Harpeth River and his casualties evacuated, pulled out of Franklin at midnight. His mission was accomplished. He'd delayed Hood long enough for George Thomas to prepare Nashville's defenses. Hood tried to pursue, but his army couldn't. Too many officers dead, too many men wounded, too many units simply gone. The Army of Tennessee moved toward Nashville, but it was already a ghost. At the Carter House, Fountain Branch Carter emerged from his basement at dawn. His home was destroyed. The yard was covered in bodies. The smell was overwhelming. Then someone told him his son had been wounded. They brought Todd Carter home. He'd been lying in a field hospital all night, unconscious from his head wound. His family carried him into the house, laid him in his own bed. His sisters tended his wound. He never woke up. Todd Carter died on December 2nd, 2 days after the battle, in his childhood bedroom. 100 yards from where he fell, he was 24 years old. This story gets even more intense from here. If you're following along and want more people to know about this often overlooked tragedy, share this video. Send it to that friend who loves history, and leave a comment. What would you have done in Patrick Cleburne's position? Would you have obeyed Hood's order or refused? I want to know your opinion. Let's continue. The aftermath of Franklin was almost worse than the battle itself. Both armies left the field the night of November 30th. But the wounded were still there. Thousands of them, and it was freezing. The citizens of Franklin did what they could. They moved wounded men into their homes, barns, churches, anywhere with shelter, but there were too many. The town had 3,000 residents before the battle. Now there were 5,000 wounded men, most Confederate, but Union soldiers too. The smell was unimaginable. Gangrene sets in quickly in field hospitals. Surgeons amputated limbs constantly, piling severed arms and legs outside their makeshift operating rooms. People who lived through it said the sound was worse than the smell, the screaming, the pleading, men begging for death. One resident wrote, "Franklin died that day. It was never the same. How could it be? We walked in blood. We breathed death. And we will never forget." The Confederate army that stumbled toward Nashville was barely an army at all. Hood still commanded 25,000 men on paper. In reality, he had maybe 15,000 combat-effective soldiers. The rest were walking wounded, demoralized stragglers, men who'd lost their entire command structure and didn't know who they reported to anymore. The officers who survived were traumatized. They'd watched their men die for nothing, watched friends killed, watched an army destroyed by one man's pride. They didn't trust Hood anymore. And soldiers who don't trust their commander don't fight well. George Thomas was waiting in Nashville with 55,000 men, fresh troops, good supplies, strong fortifications. Hood arrived on December 2nd and dug trenches south of the city. He couldn't attack Nashville. Everyone knew it. But he couldn't retreat either. Desertion was already a problem. If he ordered a retreat, the army would probably dissolve completely, so he just sat there, waiting for something to happen. For 2 weeks, nothing did. Grant, commanding all Union armies from Virginia, kept sending Thomas orders to attack. Thomas ignored them. He was training his cavalry, waiting for the right conditions, letting hunger and cold weaken the Confederates further. Grant got impatient. He actually prepared to travel to Nashville personally to relieve Thomas of command. Then, on December 15th, Thomas attacked. It wasn't even close. Thomas sent a diversionary attack against Hood's right, while the main force rolled up the left flank. The Confederate line collapsed in hours. The next day, Thomas attacked again. This time, Hood's entire left flank was shattered. The Army of Tennessee broke. What followed wasn't a retreat, it was a rout. Confederate soldiers threw away their weapons and ran. Entire units surrendered. Officers abandoned their commands. Nathan Bedford Forrest's cavalry and a few intact units fought a determined rearguard action, preventing total annihilation. But the army was finished. By January 20th, 1865, Hood reported he had less than 19,000 men. Other reports said fewer than 15,000. The Army of Tennessee, which started the campaign with 40,000 men, had been destroyed. Franklin killed it. Nashville buried it. On January 23rd, John Bell Hood resigned. He claimed his subordinates had failed him, that his soldiers hadn't fought hard enough, that circumstances beyond his control had doomed the campaign. He never accepted responsibility for Franklin. The soldiers knew better. One Confederate survivor wrote, "We died at Franklin. Everything after was just the body refusing to admit it was dead." So what really happened at Franklin? Why did it go so wrong? On the tactical level, the answer is simple. You can't successfully attack fortified positions across open ground without artillery support. It's suicide. Every officer knew it. Hood ordered it anyway. But why did Hood order it? Historians have debated this for over a century and a half. Some say he was physically incapacitated by his wounds and pain medication. Some say he was mentally unstable. Some say he was simply incompetent. The truth is probably simpler and sadder. John Bell Hood was humiliated at Spring Hill. His subordinates had failed to block the road. His entire army had been made to look foolish, and Hood, who'd built his reputation on aggression and courage, couldn't accept that. So he ordered an attack that would prove his courage. that would punish his subordinates for their failure, that would either redeem him through victory or absolve him through glorious defeat. He didn't think about the 20,000 men he was sending to die. He thought about himself. And 7,000 men paid for his pride. Patrick Cleburne knew the attack was doomed, but he went anyway. Why? Duty, honor, the belief that a soldier obeys orders even when those orders are wrong. Cleburne was fascinating. He was born in Ireland, immigrated to America. He opposed slavery personally. In 1864, he proposed that the Confederacy should arm and free enslaved people to fight for their independence. That proposal was rejected immediately. Davis called it outrageous. And yet Cleburne fought for the Confederacy anyway, fought brilliantly, died bravely for a cause he didn't fully believe in, because he believed in something else more, the duty of a soldier. Was that heroic or tragic or both? I don't know. Maybe there's no good answer. Todd Carter's story is even more heartbreaking. He survived the entire war, fought in the worst battles, and died literally in sight of his childhood home. His father buried him in the family cemetery. You can still visit it today. The Carter house is now a museum. The walls still have the bullet holes from the battle. You can see where Todd fell, where his father carried him inside, the room where he died. 15,000 people visit every year to remember, to understand, to pay respects to the men who fought there. Because even though Franklin was a disaster, even though it was pointless, even though it never should have happened, the men who fought there deserve to be remembered, not for dying, but for the courage it took to keep walking forward when they knew they were going to die. That's not stupidity. That's not blind obedience. That's something deeper, something harder to define. Maybe we call it duty, maybe honor, maybe just love for the men fighting beside you. Whatever you call it, it was real. And 20,000 men proved it at Franklin. Today, 160 years later, historians still debate Franklin. Some call it the worst decision of the entire Civil War, worse than Pickett's charge at Gettysburg, worse than Cold Harbor, worse than any other frontal assault, because at Gettysburg, Lee at least had artillery support and thought he had a chance. At Franklin, Hood had nothing. No artillery, no surprise, no advantage whatsoever, just anger and pride, and 20,000 men willing to die because their commander ordered them to. The battlefield is mostly preserved today. The Carter House, the Confederate trenches, the Union works. If you walk the field, you can still trace the route of Cleburne's division. 2 miles of open ground. Try to imagine walking across it while thousands of rifles fire at you. You can't. Nobody can. Unless you've been in combat, you can't really understand what that must have been like. But we can honor it. We can remember it. We can learn from it. What's the lesson of Franklin? That pride kills. That anger clouds judgment. That soldiers deserve leaders who value their lives. That courage isn't enough if the cause is doomed. That sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is refuse an illegal or immoral order. And that wars are fought by human beings, not statistics, not units on a map. Real people with families and dreams and futures. 7,000 futures ended at Franklin because one man couldn't admit he'd made a mistake at Spring Hill. This was the story of Franklin, a story of courage and madness, of duty and pride, of 20,000 men who charged into certain death because their commander ordered them to. Patrick Cleburne died doing his duty. Todd Carter died 100 yards from home. 6 generals fell in 5 hours, and the Army of Tennessee was destroyed forever. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Leave a comment. What do you think of John Bell Hood? Was he incompetent, or was he dealt an impossible situation? I want to hear your perspective. Next week, I'm telling the story of the Siege of Petersburg. Grant and Lee, 6 months of stalemate, a war of attrition that would end the Confederacy. It's even more intense than this. Until then, Remember Franklin, remember the men who died there, and remember that every statistic in history was once a person, someone's son, someone's brother, someone's friend. They deserve better than to be forgotten.